Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Melina Palmer, who is the founder and CEO of the Brainy business. Melina, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
So the Brainy business, I love the sound of that company name. So obviously we're talking intellectual and business focus. So I want to dive into that and what you focus on, because I really love the concept of behavioral economics. It's such a really important topic. Bring us up to speed first, though, on your background and then what led you to found your company.
Absolutely. So my undergrad is in marketing and business administration, and I worked in marketing and brand strategy for the better part of 10 years. And when I did my undergrad, though, I remember just like one section of one book, just like one class, this little tiny thing about buyer psychology and why people do things and understanding that behavior. And I thought it was just beyond fascinating and knew I wanted to go get a degree in that, go back for a master's, and spent 10 years calling universities that said those programs didn't exist and it wasn't a thing. And then, by happenstance was speaking at a conference and working in an innovation group and met some people from the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, which is their behavioral economics team. And they were talking about the research they did, and I knew it was what I had been looking for. And so I found a program and got my master's in behavioral economics, which is really the psychology of why people buy and how the brain actually makes decisions instead of the way that we think that it should on a logical level, because we don't do what we think we should or would like to do in general. So understanding those rules of the brain. And when I started my program for my degree, I knew I was reasonably early, especially, like I said, spending 10 years being told that it was a field that didn't exist. And so, but what I found is the field was so academic when I got into it, and the things that were so obvious to me about how you can better communicate with the brain and buying decisions and marketing and communication and pricing strategy and product development just wasn't being talked about anywhere. It didn't exist. And so I said, well, I guess I'll do that. So started my podcast and the work in my consultancy, and here we are.
That's awesome. So I absolutely love the whole approach, because I teach for several universities, and I've said this so many times, whether it's in front of the class or online in a lecture, is that so many times, like consumer behavior is a class that you can take and that I teach, and it feels like that whole class is just a class in psychology, and in most cases, many cases, it really is. And so I remember when I did my graduate work, one of the books that stood out to me was Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. And I'm sure you're familiar with that one. And then, Biology, B-U-I, Biology is, a really great, book on why people make buying decisions. And then when you mentioned pricing, it made me think about an example that I've used so many times just why people, our knee-jerk reaction on price, whether it's too high or too low, is so important. Because if you were thinking about, let's say, a Lamborghini and you saw one on sale for $5,000, well, you would think immediately something is up. So I think that pricing is such a huge mindset in reality, and it positions people in their mind of viewing that brand. So let's talk a little bit about how the mindset and the psychology of making these buying decisions. Literally, I feel like there's two perspectives. One is from the buyer's perspective, and then one is from the brand's perspective, right?
Yes, definitely. And so I got my master's in behavioral economics from a school of psychology. So I'm very much on that psych side of the field. And there are so many interesting concepts at play. There are hundreds of them going on in the brain at any given moment. And really, I think the most important thing to note is that the subconscious brain of the consumer, that underlying, we don't really know, that what we would think is like our gut instinct sort of decision making versus being uber logical, is making 99% of the decisions that we have basically all day long, are using these rules of thumb. And where we like to think that we're being rational and evaluating everything, there's something else that our subconscious is drawing us toward. And so I do have lots of episodes on my podcast about pricing strategy, and I work on that a lot. And really the big thing to know is that in general, pricing is never about price. All the stuff that happens first matters much more than the price itself. And so drawing the brain in and getting it excited, I like to use this example of cookies. So say we're walking down the street, we're having a great conversation, and then all of a sudden you smell these amazing cookies baking. And we're still talking, but we're like cartoon characters and our noses are pulling us down the street trying to find the source of this scent. And then we get in front of the store and you see there's a line, and then you go inside and they have, today only buy 3, get 1 free, and a free sample. And before we know it, we walk out with cookies. Whereas if we were walking down the street, same conversation, and someone shoves a flyer in our face and says, hey, I've got free samples, and for today only, if you buy 4 of them, you only have to pay for 3, and like, come on in. We're really annoyed and maybe talking about bad sales techniques. And by the time we see the line, we're just writing bad Yelp reviews and, smell the cookies and go, bleh, like there's no way we would buy from them. So the decision to buy has nothing to do with the price. Could have been $3 cookies in the first scenario, 50-cent cookies in the other. But our subconscious has decided that we like this experience. We want to find that scent and, take advantage of the chemicals and things our brain wants. Or like, yuck, we hate them and I could never possibly buy anything from them. They're so terrible. That price isn't really a factor until you get really down the line. So understanding what's happening in the brain and how to pull those levers, and knowing all the same things happen just in the different order in both scenarios. So how you execute on that will determine whether someone wants to buy from you or they're really turned off by what you're putting out in the world.
And I'm certain that there are let's call them universal kind of laws within that realm. But then there's always the outliers, like myself. I find myself a skeptic, because I know all the tricks of the trade, and it's like, come on, quit trying to do that whole, one of my daughters went out yesterday looking for a vehicle, and she said one of the salespeople kept saying, well, why don't you go ahead and walk around your vehicle and go ahead and sit in your vehicle? And I'm like, yeah, what a sales technique to kind of, do that future pacing your vehicle. I don't buy that. I don't like it. I know that, statistically it works, so they have to do it. But what you just said made me think about a question from why we make decisions. And in my consulting and coaching in the world of authority positioning, I know about heuristics of making decisions. So I want to get your opinion on the perspective of making decisions from seeing what I call authority trust triggers. So people are drawn to experts. And so, for instance, right now, people could be hearing about our interview and listening to you and go, ooh, I really want to learn more from Melina. So let's see here. What's her email address? Melina@AOL.com. Oh, right. Now that's not your email address. But
don't prime people with that. That's
right.
Not right.
Please do not send that. Or let's go to your website and it's like built on Wix. And nothing against Wix, but I'm trying to make the point that when people really want a high intellectual interaction with someone, let's say like yourself, you better darn well not have an AOL account or a Wix website or business cards that are on, Flimsy. You've got to set that stage. So I would ask you, if there is a line that, that you can cross and become too much like, hey, look, I'm the expert, you need to come see me. And people are like, yes, I'm drawn to experts. I don't want to waste my time with someone that's not an expert, but I don't want to call you because I think you're too much of an expert and you're going to cost too much. So where do you find that balance when your brand or your business, you need to be seen as a trusted advisor and that authority, but yet at the same time, you need to be reachable and identifiable to your target audience?
The very complex question that I think we could talk about for a much longer period of time. But for the nutshell response is that, so one, yes, I actually have an article I wrote for Inc. magazine that's talking about, it's called Ditch Your Flimsy Paper Business Cards Right Now. And it's that same, the power of touch, understanding our senses and how we are primed and what that can be doing. And I think a good example for that too is Roger Dooley wrote a book called Friction. And I love the example that I could pick it off of my bookshelf with my eyes closed because it has a very rough texture on the cover, which makes you think of friction. And that was a very intentional choice. And what you get from that, even if you don't consciously recognize it, is that you have that moment of like, wow, if he thought this much about the paper, imagine what's inside. There's that association that can come from our senses. Again, even if we can't consciously articulate and say why we like it, but is underlying in a lot of decisions and things that we make. And that being said, there's a lot of potentially where, it's a little too slick or sleazy or whatever, where people think, the used car salesman is a pretty standard one that you already kind of brought up, and where you feel like you go in expecting they're going to be using these tricks on you, and so your guard is up. Whereas the same tactics of, like you said, for you, imagining yourself here, maybe you don't pick up on it quite as much in a different scenario because you're not really on edge as you are when you go to buy a car and the timeshare presentation would be very different a mental approach than if I went to a restaurant and knew I wanted to order something already. It's a little bit of so some of those tactics might work. So
let's talk about the. Go ahead. Finish that.
Sorry. No, I was going to say there are other priming techniques that you can put in to show that you are still approachable and like to work with different types of organizations. So for me, I think because I have a podcast and different things, people might assume that it's really, really expensive to work with me. But talking about how I do some work, I do work with entrepreneurs and small businesses in addition to corporate clients. And having that out front and center can make it to where people think, oh, like maybe there is an opportunity here. And so just being cognizant of what you put out into the forefront can really shape what people see when they look at you and your website.
Yeah. And then that whole authenticity, transparency, approachability, all of those things need to come into play. So I think that's a huge, huge piece. And I know your latest book is called What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And I would like to ask, why can't they tell you? Do they just not know themselves, right? And then does the book talk a little bit about the buyer's journey? Because I think that is such an important aspect in this behavioral economics we're talking about.
Yes. So yes to both in that. So the book really is about applying behavioral economics and behavioral science concepts in business. So you mentioned some great books. Others in behavioral economics, I'm a fan of, I really like Predictably Irrational and Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow and so many others that are really quintessential within the field. But the reason I wrote this book is because so much of what's out there is just, we found this, isn't that cool? And we learned this, isn't that cool? But there's no, here's how you could use this and what it means for a business. And really that applied behavioral science and behavioral economics is what my podcast is about. And then that's what the book follows as well. So it's almost like a reference book of sorts, to where it's got about 15 concepts that are identified where you can learn about framing or priming or reciprocity. And then there's a method, a recipe essentially to follow to start applying yourself and getting to see which concepts are playing off of each other and ways to start actually using and applying behavioral economics within your own business. And as far as the why they can't tell you, it is the foundations of behavioral economics in that people don't know. So the conscious and subconscious brain they don't speak well to each other. So they may say that, if you put baking soda in your toothpaste, I would buy it in a focus group. And then so you go and put baking soda in and nobody buys it. And they weren't intentionally
it's just so
lying.
gritty. It just doesn't taste right. It's like, wait, that's what you guys just told me. Yeah.
Right, but they don't know why. It was because the package was shiny and none of the other ones on the shelf were. So
okay, but guess what? Let's use that as an example. Let's say that we did that same focus group, and and you and I own the toothpaste company, and it's this brand new brand, and we started creating some buzz, and we got some influencer, whoever that person may be, to start on Instagram and commercials talking about this unbelievable new brand of toothpaste. It sounds crazy that I'd be talking about it, but let me just tell you, the thing that I liked about it most was the fact that it's got substance to it. And kind of like the book you just mentioned, Friction, it just feels different. And you know what? I'm just tired of all these, really minty toothpaste that just doesn't feel like it's clean anything. But this toothpaste kind of has some sandpaper. I just feel like my teeth are getting cleaned. I will bet you that now the audience would go, well, I need that too. Yeah, that makes sense. So while one person or group might go, it's too gritty, I hate it, the fact that it was used by and presented the right way and the potential negative of the grittiness now is turned to a positive of, ooh, it's cleaning your teeth a little bit better and it's going to get down into your, gum line. Isn't that part of then drawing people through that buyer's journey and helping them formulate those decisions on their own?
Absolutely. And social proof, which is, the concept you're talking about there, is so important. And celebrity is one aspect of that. There are other, the Yelp reviews and 5 stars and whatever. But that person talking about something in that way and taking the thing that would be a hindrance and getting ahead of it, right? Like you said, having a Kardashian talk about how much they love brushing their teeth with sandpaper, a bunch of people are going to go and jump on the train. So finding that way to message and somebody who can speak to that is something that can absolutely encourage people to overcome something that might have been a fear, because we are a herding species, and knowing that someone already has been there and they like it, and someone that you trust and want to emulate, if they're on board, I should be too. They must have done some sort of due diligence. Yep. Yes. 100%.
So good. What's another one of the key points that you teach in your book?
I would say I have a kind of walking through a framework that I call behavioral baking. And so just knowing when you go to apply something like behavioral economics, it's kind of like if you decided you wanted to become a master baker. You don't get there overnight, and there's a process of understanding, what eggs, butter, sugar, flour, what do they do? What's the point? And needing to know what you're trying to make before you jump in. So if you don't know if you're going to make bread or cake or cookies before you get started, you're going to end up with a mess no matter what. So understanding what they do, what you want to make, and what you're trying to accomplish, and then having some practice along the way as you test. And the book walks you through one of those recipes of a way to go. But the number one thing that people get wrong and that I see with my clients is just not understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, not thinking enough up front about what's really happening with the clientele that you're working with, what you're trying to encourage them to do and why. And so taking enough time to think about the problem and really understand what's happening in the underlying behavior is the most important thing. And you should be spending way more time there than just assuming I know the problem right off the bat. The problem is people don't know that our toothpaste is better or whatever, but there's something else that's actually happening that you really need to be figuring out so you can pull those right behavioral levers.
Yeah, I agree with that 1,000%. People, you get myopic. You think your little whatever service or product is this because you heard one customer say they liked that, but then now all of a sudden that's what you've rested on for the last few years, and you never update and listen to your audience and ask them and kind of do what Seth Godin talks about in his book Tribes, and just kind of envelop your focus on what your clients and network and people are saying or needing. So that's a really, really big piece. So let's wrap up with this. What's the best way someone could reach out, connect with you, learn more about your offerings and your books?
Absolutely. So the book, the podcast, consulting, all of that, best places would be just going to my website, which is thebrainybusiness.com. And the podcast is also called The Brainy Business, so that's easy. And you can find me on all the socials as The Brainy Biz, B-I-Z, or just, Melina Palmer on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, Melina, thank you so much for coming on. It was really fun talking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.